Good afternoon. My name is Terry Holder, and I'm excited to talk to you today about the theory that I've chosen for my research paper, Expectancy Violation Theory. So let's get started. Let's start at the very beginning. As I learned along with you in our textbook, influencing an audience dates back as far as the Renaissance, following the Middle Ages, when humanistic scholars became interested in the power of words and how those words had influence over their messages and ultimately their audiences. As someone who writes for a living, various messages from newsletters to speeches to marketing and public relations pieces, I've been very, very interested in all the different theories that we've learned about, and it was really difficult for me to pick one to focus on for the research paper. When I came across expectancy violation theory, that's the one that really piqued my interest, and I started doing some research about Judy Burgoon. Judy worked during the early 70s to develop expectancy violation theory and has become such a profound figure in the communication world that she was named recently the most prolific female scholar in communication in the 20th century. And she so interested me that I decided to pick expectancy violation theory to focus on my research paper. Expectancy violation theory actually derives from work that originated in the 1960s by someone named Edward Hall, who was an anthropologist from the Illinois Institute of Technology, and he's actually recognized for coining the term proxemics and its definition, the study of people's use of space as a special elaboration of culture. And Judy Burgoon really took that idea to the next level. And so the premise of expectancy violation theory at first was a violation of expectancies or social norms that will elicit a response. And at the beginning of her work, she specifically focused on space violations, and she did some research and some study on what that actually means, and I thought it was interesting enough to pull out some of the details. She decided in order to know how to violate the space norms or what was accepted in society, you had to know what those norms were. And so through some studies that she did, she determined that for males speaking with males, the distance was about 40 inches that was acceptable. For males speaking with a female, it was 34 inches, and 38 inches was the acceptable norm distance for females, no matter which gender they were speaking with. Once Burgoon defined what those spatial distances were, then she decided what the violation of these norms were based upon, and they were three things. One was the reward or punishment of power of the violator. The second was the direction of deviation from the expected or the anticipated distance. And the third was the point at which the recipient of the violation experienced a threat. What I found extremely interesting about this study was it wasn't just the identification of these factors, but it was how they contributed to this contradiction in basic human desire for both affiliation and the need for personal space. And she really attributed this paradox to the species' most basic instinct for survival, which is the biological need for personal interaction, which really results in procreation and the survival of the species, while at the same time our inherent need for individual survival, isolation, and self-preservation. And it was really this dichotomy of those two things that created her work on expectancy violation theory. As Burgoon continued her research studying spatial violations, she came to the conclusion that really the communication of a message and the influence over an audience is more than just about the space in between two people or a speaker and an audience. And so she expanded her theory to include things like eye contact, the use of touch, facial expressions, body lean, to be all-encompassing. And so all of the communication elements really play into her violation theory. One of the most interesting pieces of research that I found that supported or analyzed expectancy violation theory was by psychologist Harvey Tickler. And he did a study and has a premise based on the fact that he believes expectancies are actually developed at the earliest stages of life. He did a study that talked about the cognition and development of routines and probabilities or expectations that babies have just in terms of repetition, and the expectancies that they have, and that they start at infancy and they get into those routine and expect predictability, and how it affects their growth and development into adulthood. He did several case studies on children who had lived in foster homes or had gone through critical situations in their life where those expectancies were interrupted, and talked about how that affected them as adults. And there were a couple ways to think about that from my perspective. As the person delivering the communication message, it impacts you knowing that baggage or the history or whatever the influences were on an adult as a young person, that it's going to influence their ability to adapt to change, to violations and expectancies and unexpected things that happen to them. So even as you're crafting your message as the communicator, you can't just assume one size fits all. And that was really eye-opening to me from his perspective. It's been so easy for me to remain engaged and focused and challenged by this research for the research paper. This theory that I chose has had daily implications on my work and really challenged me to be a more strategic thinker about my messages and my audiences, and inspired me to do things differently and hopefully better. But I have to tell you, this last information that I want to share with you really threw me for a loop when I read it, because as we've all been challenged through our weekly blogs and comparing world views to the biblical view, and it's really made me think more spiritually about my work. When I read the work of this German philosopher, it stopped me in my tracks to make me think about the biblical view of expectancy violation theory, and does it violate some of the ethical practices or standards that I have for myself. You can obviously read what's on this slide, but his quote, "Anytime we speak or act, we have a moral obligation to be truthful." I struggled a lot in my paper because I kept wanting to put the word in there, manipulate, and I don't like that word because it has such a negative connotation. But this quote really made me think about what I'm doing, and if I'm doing it for the right reasons, and if it is something that's unethical, or how I might use this for the betterment of something and not do it in an unethical way. So I wanted to just include that toward the end of my presentation and talk to you a little bit about that. And I'm interested when you give me feedback, if you would give me some feedback on your thoughts about that. As a Christian in the public sector, it's a struggle sometimes to have those Christian values come out through my work. And as I have been thinking about implementing expectancy violation theory, I've had to rethink that a little bit. So it was a wonderful topic, but definitely has challenged me and expanded my thinking. Thank you for letting me have the opportunity to talk with you for a few moments about expectancy violation theory. It's been a really wonderful opportunity for me to study in depth about this theory, and as I just mentioned, it really challenged my way of thinking and gave me an opportunity to think about how I can use those tools in a positive way to be a more effective communicator, and I look forward to hearing your feedback. Thank you.